Welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Stephen Solmeyer, who I'm going to call Steve. And Steve is a lawyer and a clinical psychologist and mediator. He's based in Marin County. Stephen specializes in complex and high conflict disputes in a wide range of subject areas, including business, divorce, probate, elder law, workplace, partnerships, and family businesses. That's quite a wide range. Anyway, as a mediator, Steve creates an approach that views disputes not primarily as legal events, but rather as human events that have emotional, legal, and financial components, each of which must be addressed in order to achieve an optimal outcome. And in particular, his years of experience working with people and organizations in conflict has convinced him of the value of identifying and working with, rather than shying away from, underlying psychological and emotional obstacles that are often the real barriers to the resolution of conflicts. So by attending to all aspects of disputes, he's found that parties are generally able to achieve the most comprehensive and durable results and to maximize efficiency and conservation of resources. So Steve, Dr. Solmeyer, his mother is so proud, is the founder and president of Integrative Mediation Bay Area, which teams up mental health professionals and attorney mediators in a conjoint mediation model in family law, probate, and other cases. He received his undergraduate and law degrees from Stanford University and his doctorate in psychology from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in Palo Alto, where he was on the adjunct faculty in 2002 and 2003. Steve, welcome. Thank you for coming and joining me today at Financial Insider Weekly.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Okay. Today, Steve and I are going to be talking about the thorny issues dealing with resolving financial disputes of various kinds, and mostly focusing on the emotional level, the human level of these conflicts. So, Steve, maybe first, maybe you could explain a little bit about why you decided to be both a lawyer and a psychologist.
I'm still trying to answer that question. I didn't plan it. I started out as a lawyer. I went to law school right out of college at Stanford, and I became a trial lawyer. I specialized in complex business disputes, primarily intellectual property, patents and copyrights and such. And after doing that for a while, I found that I was getting really frustrated because nobody was really talking about what was really going on. Mm-hmm. The law sort of constrained the lawyers, the parties, the judges to talk in a certain coded language in terms of causes of action and elements of causes of action and evidence to prove those. And people couldn't talk about the fact that they were actually pissed off or feeling hurt or betrayed or annoyed or whatever was really actually driving the case. Mm-hmm. And I grew sufficiently frustrated with the whole, not the whole system, but the one-sidedness of the system, mm-hmm. that I decided I needed a change. And at one point I had a rare lull in my workload, and I'd heard about this little school in Palo Alto, and a buddy of mine actually from Stanford was in their first year program, so I went down and checked it out, and it just seemed like the right thing, and next thing I knew I was a clinical psychologist a few years later.
Yeah. So the whole thing, because the whole legal system framework traditionally has been an adversarial one, so it's got to be, your lawyer and my lawyer, and trying to be cagey about, coming from a position of strength, this, that, and the other thing, and that actually can come and get in the way, I guess, of communication.
Yeah, exactly. That's putting it very, very nicely. The whole system is set up to be adversarial. It comes out of actually medieval jousting. That's mm-hmm. actually the source of our jurisprudential system. This nobleman had a dispute with this nobleman about, let's say, where their boundary was, and they'd choose each of them a knight, and the knights would joust, and whoever was left in the saddle, that person's lord was right.
Trial by combat.
And that's still what it is today. So it actually positions the parties as enemies, as adversaries. And it's about the worst thing you could do if what you're trying to do is actually come together and reach a resolution.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe you can tell us a little about some of the different kinds of financial disputes that you've mediated and how they're similar, how they're different.
I've mediated an awful lot of different kinds. Basically, almost all the disputes I've mediated have some financial component. Not all of them. Sometimes there might be a community dispute or a school dispute where it's not about money, but whether it's a divorce, whether it's a dispute between two businesses, it could be a breach of contract, it could be a patent infringement claim, it could be a partnership squabble or dissolution, it could be a family business, it could be a probate case, an elder case. There's usually money involved. So it's a wide, wide range of cases.
Mm-hmm. A lot of these disputes you've had to deal with, I guess, relate to families. The families, it seems like, especially when we're talking about money issues, like settling estates and so forth, and divorces. I mean, it's just natural that these types of things happen. But maybe you can talk about some of the unique issues in family disputes.
I'd say that what they tend to have in common is relationships that people want to maintain once the dispute is over, if not even during. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of issues that family disputes have in common with non-family disputes, but what really is unique to them is the fact that people know each other and have been in relationship and family for a long time and generally want to maintain that. That requires a different emphasis and a different focus and sometimes a different approach because although people might be fighting about money, whether it's a family business or maybe it's an inheritance issue or a divorce, there's still relationships to be protected. Mm-hmm. And if they're in court, if they're in litigation, if they're in the adversary system, there's a good chance that there's going to be permanent rupture, and usually people don't want that. It's too high a price to pay, and there is a better way.
Yeah. So sadly, I had something like this happen in my own family. That my brother-in-law, my sister was married. She was lived with this person for about 15 years before they were married, and then within 2 weeks after they were married, the guy died. Wow. And he had children from a previous marriage. And unfortunately, he hadn't properly settled his previous wife's estate. And so there are disputes between my sister and the children from the previous marriage about, getting these matters settled. And fortunately, his son had an interest in trying to keep peace as much as he could in the family. So he was really the primary beneficiary, and so he sort of shared with his sisters and with my sister in order to try to keep peace in the family. But because of the way that the whole thing developed, my sister hasn't been able to speak with those kids who are adult children since. And it's just very sad because, in a sense, they had become sort of second children to her, or at least good friends over the years, and it was just ruined their relationship.
Oh, that is tragic.
Yeah.
It sounds like she was in effect a stepmother to them.
Yeah.
And then to have money, or death also plays a role in it too. Death really changes things, and a lot of stuff that might have been buried before often comes out. And that's one reason why the probate disputes in particular are difficult.
Oh yeah.
Adult siblings, often middle-aged siblings, might be getting along just fine, and then mom dies or dad dies or both, and then they're squabbling about what happened when they were 5.
Right.
Mom always liked you better, or you pushed me out of the window when I was 7.
Mom gave you a dog and gave me a duck. All right. Well, anyway, so why don't you talk a little bit about some of your thoughts related about how emotions and psychological interests intersect with money in financial disputes?
The way they tend to intersect is like this. Usually when people come to me, they're pretty much in the thick of the dispute. My father was a bankruptcy lawyer, and he used to say, "Son, people always come to me too late. And I followed in his footsteps. But that's okay. It's sometimes hard to anticipate these things. But usually the emotional part of it and the financial/legal part of it is all intertwined. Mm-hmm. And it becomes very difficult to act like an objective, reasonable business person when in fact your emotions are very much involved. And when people try to do that and just focus, quote unquote, objectively on what do we need to do to fix this partnership, let's say, and not address the underlying emotional issues, it tends to get all tangled up because the emotional issues are present. They're in the room. Mm-hmm. And if they're not addressed, then you just end up usually at impasse. That's usually what I do is I try to start out in my mediations dealing with the financial issues or the legal issues. And then when things get stuck, when there's this feeling of like grinding of gears or spinning your wheels in mud, that's when I know there's a hidden emotional issue that isn't being addressed. So my job is to help the parties to sort of disentangle the legal financial issues from the emotional psychological issues and deal with them in their respective domains. Can I give you an example of this that might make the point? Just before coming over here, I was helping two partners to a partnership try and save their partnership, essentially. They'd gotten to a point where they were essentially ready to divorce. And there were a number of particular issues they wanted to deal with. Attribution, who was the founder, and what had each of them contributed, and how should they be credited with that in terms of ownership interests and decision-making power, and issues like this. And it became apparent after listening to them for about a half hour or so that what was really going on were emotional issues that really had nothing to do directly with the specific issues that they had come to mediate. What was really going on was that partner number one, who was older, woman, had been mentoring the younger woman and brought her into the practice and had created this very successful program. It was for working with teenage girls. Mm-hmm. And once the younger therapist came in, they created these groups and just took off. It was already happening, but then it really exploded once the second person came in. The second person is really enthusiastic and really wants to be seen as sort of a co-founder of this thing, and the older one really wants to be seen as the originator of the thing. And really, it was about the older woman feeling sort of upstaged by the younger woman and had her
disrespected a little bit.
Disrespected a little bit, but also it turns out she has her own lifelong issues with feeling deficient and feeling unappreciated, which had happened in her family, and the younger one had a mother who she was always trying to please, and so that was sort of what she was projecting onto this older woman. The other one was actually kind of resentful about having always to take care of everybody, and some very, very personal things came out. In fact, the older one said through her tears, her own mother had committed suicide when she was 13, and she had tried everything to save her, and notwithstanding everything, she couldn't save her.
Well, she was only 13.
Exactly. But that's still what's inside.
Yeah, you still have this baggage that you carry with you.
Exactly. So that 13-year-old girl who's feeling heartbroken and overwhelmed and also angry at mother is now trying to deal with this other person who's being a little girl trying to please her unpleasable mother, and all we had to do was tease that apart and just start talking about those issues and reach some level, wasn't like psychotherapy, but just reach some level of identification of what was happening. And then there was like a settling. We could almost say, okay, now I see who's been in the room. Okay, now let's talk about the attribution issue. And then we had an agreement in about 10 minutes at that point.
So that's kind of interesting. You started playing therapist to the therapist, it sounds like.
In this case, I mean, that's unusual, but that happened to be the case.
Yeah.
And they need therapy.
Right.
Just like with the rest of us.
Maybe more so. That's why they get into it sometimes in the first place.
Right.
Anyway, so, I remember what I was going to say. We talked about this a little bit before, and it's that a lot of times people, even though they're haggling about money, that's not really the issue at all. It may be, and again, you may have seen this many times in your career, that the money issue disappears when there's an apology that's made.
Right.
That really that's what they're looking for, is, just say, I'm sorry, I screwed up, or, an admission or whatever. So
I think that's very perceptive, and I think that's a perfect example of this conflation or intertwining of the legal and the emotional. Mm-hmm. I'll give you another example similar to the one that you just raised. Let's say you have a divorce case, and the couple are at an impasse around spousal support. The wife says, I want $20,000 a month in spousal support. And the husband says, I can't pay that. I'm sorry, I can only pay you $2,000. No way, you have to pay me more. And it's clear, that energy behind it, there's something going on. And if you take the time to unpack it, what you find, well, in this particular hypothetical, let's say husband had an affair, wife's incredibly angry and feels betrayed, and she wants him to pay for it.
Yes.
But because we're in mediation and there's lawyers, okay, you need to pay me in money. But the problem is, even if he could afford it, and sometimes men out of guilt do pay more than they might otherwise, it doesn't actually heal the hurt. And so it's not actually resolving the emotional problem. Whereas if he could actually empathize and apologize, just as you're saying, then the emotional issue is resolved on its own terms, rather than doing it indirectly. Trying to solve an emotional problem with a legal solution. It doesn't work. There's separate domains. So the legal problems, the financial problems have to be dealt with financially, legally. The emotional and psychological have to be dealt with on their own terms. The problem is in conventional mediations or other forms of dispute resolution, it's all about sweeping the emotions under the rug. We don't want to deal with that.
Sometimes we're just trying to get it done fast.
Right, but we don't want to deal with it. It's uncomfortable. The whole legal system is set up to protect us from vulnerability. We don't want to go there. So, and I've seen it in many mediations where the mediator says, as soon as somebody starts crying or there's emotion, okay, let's take a break. Or maybe let's stop for the day. For me, it's like, wait a minute. This is the way this person is letting you know there's something important going on. This is their red flag. You ignore it at your peril and theirs.
Okay. So what about when you're dealing with companies? Do you get emotional issues that are involved in these types of mediations as well? Well,
it's funny. I was just seeing that the Supreme Court granted cert granted review in a case involving Obamacare. Do corporations actually have a right to object to the requirements around birth control and such?
Right.
Similar kind of issues. Do corporations have feelings? Corporations are made out of people. Well, some of them anyway. And we're dealing with the people. The disputes are usually involving, it might be, I had a recent case, just as an example, where on the surface it was just a patent infringement case between two companies. Company number one is suing company number two, saying, you're using my technology and you're not paying me for it. However, when I first got the case and I read the pleadings, I noticed, first of all, they had named the CEO of the defendant company as an individual defendant. That's very unusual. And then I noticed that the defendant CEO had actually been a vice president of marketing for the plaintiff company. So immediately I knew, okay, something's going on here. And in fact, that was what was going on. CEO was pissed off. He'd been fired. He had been unfairly blamed, actually, for the company sort of semi-tanking after its initial public offering. And he was fired. And he was resentful, and he was hurt, and he had been saying some things and doing some things that were really pissing off the CEO of the plaintiff company. And what it finally came down to really was a conversation between the two of them. And like you said, an apology. Finally, defendant the CEO of the defendant company said, I probably said some things I shouldn't have said. I was pissed off, and I really want to put that behind me, and I'm sorry. And we had a deal in a few minutes.
Yeah. Makes a big difference.
So yeah, companies, it's really the same because there's human beings involved most of the time.
So you've been sort of talking around this, but maybe you can clarify a little bit about how
I do that sometimes, Mike.
Well, anyway, how your approach is different from the way that most mediators would approach similar kinds of disputes. Maybe you can sort of explain that a little bit. I think we've been sort of talking around that issue.
Yeah, we have. As I said, most mediators, at least in these kinds of cases, financial cases, are lawyers.
Uh-huh.
And they don't have a background in psychology, so they don't have the training to really go into these areas. And I've seen some really talented lawyer mediators say, I can't go there, I'm not comfortable, I don't have the expertise. And my feeling is, yes, it's helpful to have that kind of training, but we've all been human beings. We haven't all been lawyers, we haven't all been whatever, but we've all been human beings, so we all have some knowledge and expertise of some kind, being human, and I think lawyers don't recognize that they actually have more knowledge in this area than they think. But lawyers are a self-selected group like any other profession, as I see it, and they want to go with their strong suit. They want to stay in their comfort zone. So they don't want to deal with feelings. They want to just deal with nothing but the facts and the law. And as a result, the conversations tend to be rather one-sided.
I'm just thinking, it's kind of ironic. I mean, don't you call a lawyer a counselor?
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, in my role as a CPA, an awful lot of it is, I view it the same thing, that in a sense I'm a counselor. I'm a person that's there to hear about people's problems and try to do what I can, you know, to make suggestions, but mostly to hear them out and try to provide some direction to try to help to resolve them the best I can. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just like doctors having bedside manner, I don't know that they teach it enough in graduate school, whether it's medical school or law school or business school, but we're all counselors professionally. People aren't just coming to get a legal answer. They're really coming to us for comfort and for hope, for clarity, for support. Did I answer your question, though, about
I think
how I'm different from your average, my approach is different?
I think that you have, and like I said, I think I've sort of got the message along the way. An awful lot of, again, it's sort of being sensitive to these emotional issues, to the message that the person is giving that's behind this dispute. And then if you can help them to sort of, to verbalize that, to get that out in the open so that then they can deal with it. If they can resolve that piece, then the financial piece may either go away or at least it becomes much easier to deal with.
It becomes much easier to deal with. It rarely just goes away. Sometimes, like you say, if there's an apology, it might disappear, but I think that's just another version or variation on it becomes really easy. And I think that one of the reasons for that has to do with people really want to talk about what's important. And what's important isn't the money. You know, it's the hurt feelings or the wanting justice or whatever it is. I had one case where it was a relatively small life insurance policy, $50,000, and the claim had been denied. The insurance company said that the decedent had lied on their application.
Oh my gosh.
And the widower, who was this very kindly African-American pastor, was fighting to sort of clear his wife's name, and he was really horribly treated, and the lawyers were going back and forth about, the facts are a bit complicated, but what does he really have an action or a cause of action, or doesn't he? And finally, I just noticed he was sort of looking a little bored. I finally turned to him and said, "What's this case about for you?" And he said, "Justice." It was really about his wife's name being maligned and about the way he'd been mistreated. He'd been really rudely treated by the insurance company representative and even by the California Insurance Commission person that he spoke to. And finally, I talked to the vice president of legal for this very large insurance company, and I said, how do you want to walk in the world? How do you want to be perceived by the survivors of your insurers? And he says, you know, we really want to be seen as a good citizen. We want to treat people fairly. And so we ended up with an apology, and we ended up with, I think they paid $40,000 on a $50,000 policy. And they also offered to retrain not only the particular claims adjuster who'd been so rude, but their entire claims adjustment team, claims adjuster team, and in how to deal more humanly with people. And all of this came about by not focusing on whether such and such was an actionable cause or not, but rather what's happening here on a human level. Mm-hmm. It takes a certain level of courage to do what seems like common sense, to just talk about what's really going on here. It's more of a holistic way of looking at the situation.
Okay. We just have a couple of minutes left, so I think what I'm going to do is just ask you to throw out maybe a final thought related to this process, or whatever that you feel about this.
A final thought, gosh, I have so many thoughts. It's hard to whittle it down. I would say that anybody who finds themselves in a financial dispute or finds themselves in a position to mediate a financial dispute should look for what I call the emotional outcropping. And it will be there if you look for it. In the mediation today that I mentioned, one of the partners was fiddling with her necklace a lot. That was my first clue that she was actually feeling quite anxious. Mm-hmm. And underneath the anxiety was a lot of tears. Mm-hmm. So looking for the emotional outcroppings that tell you, wait, there's something else here. Mm-hmm. And can I ask some questions? Just really simple question. Are you feeling anxious right now? Are you willing to talk about this? You can do this around the kitchen table. Mm-hmm. So look for the emotional outcropping, and it'll help you get to a solution much more easily.
That's great. Well, Steve, I appreciate the work that you're doing and the message that you're giving here. I think that there's more. I've been getting a feeling from a number of attorneys that I'm getting that they're looking for something beyond, just the mechanical legal approach, and they're becoming more sensitive, I think, to their clients, which I think is good news. And I want to thank you for coming all the way from Marin to be my guest here today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mike.
My pleasure all together. Folks, I hope we've given you some things to think about. We'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.